Alright, let's get up there. Let's go. There he is, I see him. Can you see him? It does, man. He's a good one, dude.
What's up, guys? Thanks a lot for watching the episode of Grit last week. Kev and Jake hunted their butts off and got really close on this one. In this hunt recap, we're going to focus on the buck encounters they had and why they decided to set up where they did. We're going to talk about two main points here, the seeking phase of the rut and where we usually find doe bedding. To start, let's talk about the seeking phase and what bucks are usually doing during this time of year. This hunt was the first week in November, but the seeking phase of the rut usually starts a few days to a week prior at the end of October. And based on what we've seen, the big bucks are usually on a doe by the first week in November. In general, the seeking phase is all about targeting bucks traveling from doe group to doe group looking for a hot doe. Setting up on travel routes between doe groups is where we've had the most encounters, and this is what we target during this time of the year. As a first step, we always try to identify doe concentration areas like food and bedding. First, let's talk about doe bedding. This can be challenging because doe bedding seems to be a little more random than buck bedding. Does seem to like the thick stuff, and in the hills, they don't necessarily bed on those leeward points like the bucks do. In fact, we've observed does bedding on the windward side of ridges several times. You actually saw an example of this in the episode last week. That big buck that Jake and Corey encountered was with some does that were bedded on the windward side of the ridge. Jake and Corey set up on the leeward side, so they were a little too far away to get a shot at that buck. We also saw this in Ohio and Wisconsin last year, and this is something we're going to start targeting moving forward. Another destination location for this part of the season is food sources. This is pretty self-explanatory, but the does are still hitting their normal food sources and bucks are checking those areas. On this hunt, we saw most of the feeding activity on cut cornfields. In our opinion, setting up during this time of year is all about picking the right bedding areas. If you can get the bedding areas right, you can start to figure out the travel routes between them. Then you can take wind and thermals into account to determine how bucks will most efficiently check those areas. This is straightforward, but it can be challenging picking the right spot because buck movement is less predictable. And this is where the idea of rut funnels comes into play. A rut funnel is any terrain or topographical feature that deer use to travel when searching for does. This could be a strip of cover or a thermal hub that allows them to efficiently scent check an area. In the episode last week, you saw Kev get an opportunity at a buck on the ground. This was a really smart move he made here. Early in the morning, he was set up lower on the ridge. Before the sun comes up, the thermals can still be dropping or not rising yet, which means bucks are more likely to travel lower elevations until the sun gets higher in the sky and thermals start to rise. When the thermals started to rise that morning, Kev got down out of the tree and moved higher onto the ridge.
Just get on the ground behind that log, and he might circle back. I don't think he's gonna come back through the bottom if he's already scent checked from up there, that spot.
Shortly after, Kev got his opportunity. In theory, here's why that buck was moving the way that he did. Kev had a wind blowing like this, then the thermals started to rise like this. The buck was able to travel the top of the ridge and scent check below him using thermals, and the top of the ridge using the wind. This was the most efficient way for him to safely search for does that morning. So let's quickly summarize this episode. First, at the end of October and early in November, bucks are searching for does. Does are concentrated in bedding areas and on food sources just like other times of the year. Setting up on travel routes between these destinations is the best opportunity for buck encounters. You can use terrain and topographical features as funnels for setup locations. Next, it's a good strategy to hunt all day during this time of year because bucks will sometimes wait for does to bed down before they start moving. Just like Kev did in the episode last week, sometimes you need to adjust your location based on changes in thermal activity during these all-day sits. So that sums up the 6th hunt recap. As always, thank you you guys for watching. We really appreciate it. If you guys have any feedback or questions, drop a comment on the video and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week for episode 7 of Grit, which is part 2 of our trip down in Indiana.